Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're on Deep Dive number 8 in our series on business in the real world, and today we're tackling business expansion.
It's a fascinating topic, really. The dream for so many businesses is to grow, reach new markets.
Right. I mean, who doesn't want to see their company become the next big thing?
Exactly. But actually getting there, well, that's a whole other story.
That's where we come in, to break it all down. So let's start with the basics. What are the different ways a business can even expand?
Well, you can think of it like two main paths you could take. You've got organic growth, like you're carefully nurturing something from a tiny seed.
Okay, I'm picturing a little sprout.
And then there's external growth. That's more like you're taking a branch from one tree and grafting it onto another one.
Interesting. So two very different approaches. Let's start with organic growth. What does that look like in the real world? Can you give me some examples?
Sure. Like, imagine your favorite local coffee shop. Suddenly they open a second location across town.
Oh, yeah. That's always exciting.
Or maybe a tech company. They decide to launch a brand new product to add to their lineup.
Hmm. So in both cases, they're using what they already have, their own resources and expertise, to grow.
You got it. They're building on their existing foundation, step by step.
So it's about playing to your strengths. Like, for example, Apple. They were already crushing it with the iPhone, then they released the Apple Watch.
Bingo. Apple is a textbook example of a company that really knows how to do organic growth. They built this incredibly loyal customer base and expanded their product line in a really smart and strategic way.
Yeah, they didn't just jump into a million different things all at once. They took their time and...
Exactly. They focused on quality over quantity.
Yeah.
But of course, no approach is perfect.
Right. Even organic growth must come with its challenges, right?
Absolutely. While it's generally less risky and expensive than, say, merging with another company, organic growth can be slow.
Ah, so it's the tortoise, not the hare.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, think about everything that goes into just opening one new store.
Yeah, hiring staff, getting the word out, making sure everything's running smoothly.
And launching a new product, same thing. Market research, development, marketing campaigns, it all adds up, both in terms of time and resources.
So steady and controlled, but maybe not for the impatient entrepreneur. What about franchising? It seems like that could be a way to expand more quickly without necessarily buying out another company.
Oh, absolutely. Franchising is like this fast track to growth. A company, the franchisor, can expand their reach quickly by leveraging other people's money and effort, the franchisees.
Interesting. So walk me through how that actually works.
I think the easiest way to visualize it is to think about McDonald's. They don't actually own and operate every single McDonald's restaurant around the world.
Oh, that's right.
What they do is they grant individuals, these are the franchisees, the right to use their brand. So that means their logo, their recipes, their whole business model in exchange for a fee.
Ah, so that's how those golden arches pop up everywhere. But I imagine there are some risks involved in handing over your brand to someone else.
Oh, for sure. The biggest hurdle with franchising is, well, keeping things consistent. Maintaining quality control across the board is huge.
I can see that. I mean, one bad experience at one McDonald's could affect people's perception of the whole brand.
Exactly. It all comes down to consistency and making sure those franchisees really uphold the brand's reputation. So that's organic growth in a nutshell. But there's another side to expansion, a bit more, shall we say, dramatic.
Okay, let's bring on the drama. We're talking about external growth now, right?
Yeah.
Mergers and acquisitions.
You got it. This is where things get really interesting. It's about joining forces with another company or sometimes completely absorbing them.
Okay, so this is where we see those big headlines about companies merging or being bought out for billions of dollars.
Yeah.
But there must be more to it than just making a big splash in the news.
Right. There are actually different types of external growth strategies, each with its own logic and its own set of potential benefits and risks.
All right, break it down for me. What are the main types?
Well, first up, you have horizontal integration. Picture two puzzle pieces that fit perfectly together. That's what it's like when a company merges with one of its competitors in the same industry.
So instead of fighting each other for market share, they decide to team up.
Exactly. And a really good real-world example of this is when Coca-Cola, the soda giant, bought a majority stake in Innocent Drinks.
Innocent Drinks, they make those smoothies, right? But why would Coca-Cola, known for sugary sodas, want to buy a smoothie company?
Well, Innocent Drinks was already really successful in the healthy beverage market, a market that Coca-Cola wanted a piece of.
Ah.
By acquiring them, Coca-Cola suddenly had access to a whole new customer base and a whole new product line.
So it's not always about eliminating the competition. It can be about expanding your reach into different markets, right? Like diversifying your portfolio.
You got it. Horizontal integration can be a super powerful way to achieve what we call economies of scale.
Okay, now that's a term we hear a lot, but what does it actually mean in practice? Economies of scale.
Well, we can dig into that a bit later. For now, just think about it as being able to produce more stuff, more goods or services, but at a lower cost per unit because you're bigger.
Okay, we'll definitely come back to that. So that's horizontal integration. What other types of external growth are out there?
All right, next up is vertical integration. And with this one, a company joins forces with a business that's at a different stage in the same supply chain.
So instead of joining forces with a competitor, you're teaming up with a company that's involved in a different part of the process of making or delivering your product.
Exactly. And there are two main types of vertical integration: forward integration and backward integration. Think of it like this. Forward integration is all about moving closer to the customer. Like, imagine if a coffee roaster decided to buy a chain of cafes to make sure their beans were the ones being brewed and served.
So they're basically cutting out the middleman and establishing a direct connection with the people who are actually buying their coffee.
Exactly. Now, on the flip side, you've got backward integration. And this is all about securing your supply chain. Like, let's say a bakery decides to acquire a flour mill.
So they're guaranteeing a consistent supply of high-quality flour at a good price.
Exactly. So whether it's forward or backward, it's about gaining more control over either the beginning or the end of that process. Now, the last type of external growth, it's a bit different. We call it conglomerate integration. And this is where things can get a little, well, unpredictable.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this conglomerate integration.
This is when companies from totally unrelated industries decide to merge. Imagine a celebrity couple that no one saw coming.
Okay, I'm definitely picturing some odd pairings now. But seriously, why would companies from completely different fields want to merge? What's the logic behind that?
It's a strategy for diversification. A classic example is when the Walt Disney Company merged with the American Broadcasting Company, ABC, back in the 90s.
That's a pretty bold move. What was Disney's thinking there?
Well, by merging with ABC, Disney suddenly had a foothold in the world of broadcasting. It helped them expand beyond theme parks and animated films.
So they were spreading their bets across different industries, hedging their risks.
Exactly. Now, we've been talking about all the potential upsides of these mergers and acquisitions, but of course, it's not all smooth sailing, right? There are risks involved, too.
Right, buying another company is not exactly like buying a new pair of shoes.
Oh, definitely not. First off, the cost. I mean, buying out another company can be incredibly expensive.
Yeah, you're basically acquiring all their assets, but also all their liabilities, right?
Exactly. And then there's the challenge of trying to blend two very different company cultures.
Oh, right. Because on paper, a merger might look great, but in reality, you have to deal with people, personalities, different ways of doing things.
It can be a real clash of cultures, like trying to mix oil and water sometimes. What works in one company might completely backfire in the other. And then there's the issue of redundancies. You often end up with two people doing the same job when two companies combine.
Oh, that's a tough situation. So someone's got to go.
Yeah, not everyone gets to stay. Tough decisions have to be made, and it can create a lot of uncertainty and anxiety for employees. So you see, external growth, it's a high-stakes game with high rewards, but also high risks.
Yeah, it's not a decision to be taken lightly. And we've talked about the good side of getting bigger, the economies of scale, but you mentioned potential downsides too.
Yeah.
Diseconomies of scale. What does that even mean?
Well, you know how they say sometimes bigger isn't always better.
Yeah.
Well, diseconomies of scale, that's basically the dark side of growth. It's when a company gets so big, so unwieldy, that things start to break down, like a giant ship trying to squeeze through a narrow canal.
Oh, I see. It just gets too complicated, too difficult to manage effectively.
Right. You might have communication breakdowns, tons of bureaucracy, employees who feel lost in this giant organization.
And all that inefficiency can end up costing the company money, right?
Exactly. So there's this sweet spot you want to find, big enough to benefit from economies of scale, but not so big that you start experiencing diseconomies of scale.
So it's all about finding that balance. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, different types of expansion, the potential pros and cons, and it's clear there's no easy answer, right? Every company's situation is unique.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to expansion. Each company needs to carefully consider its own circumstances, its goals, its resources, and even its risk tolerance before deciding which path to take.
So much to consider. But before we move on, I want to bring our listeners into the conversation. What are your initial thoughts on all this? What are your biggest takeaways so far about these different expansion strategies?
Yeah, take a moment to reflect. Think about which approach seems most appealing to you and what potential pitfalls you think businesses really need to watch out for.
We'll come back to this in just a bit, so keep those thoughts brewing.
It really is a lot to think about, isn't it? I mean, choosing the right expansion strategy, it's not a decision to be made lightly.
Definitely not. It's a big commitment with big implications for a company's future.
Hmm.
And speaking of big companies, you mentioned earlier that General Electric, GE, they face some challenges because of their sheer size.
Yeah, TE is a really interesting case study. They're a classic example of a company that grew so big, so sprawling, that it almost became impossible to manage effectively.
So they basically became a victim of their own success, fell into that trap of diseconomies of scale we talked about.
Exactly. At one point, they were involved in everything you could imagine: appliances, healthcare, finance. I mean, you name it, they were probably doing it.
Yeah, it was almost like they were trying to conquer the entire business world.
Right. And that kind of ambition, well, it can backfire. Communication breaks down, bureaucracy takes over, and suddenly they've lost sight of what they were really good at in the first place.
It's a reminder that growth for growth's sake isn't always a good thing.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's better to focus on doing a few things really well than trying to do everything.
So how do companies even decide which path to take? I mean, is there a secret formula for a successful expansion? Or is it more of a gut feeling?
I wish there was a magic formula, but unfortunately, it's not that simple. It's more like a recipe with lots of different ingredients that you need to combine in just the right way.
Okay, so what are some of those key ingredients?
Well, companies need to think about their industry, their financial resources, their risk tolerance, and probably the most important thing, their overall goals. What are they ultimately trying to achieve through expansion?
So it's really about aligning their growth strategy with their overall vision for the company.
Exactly. What works for one company might be a disaster for another. It's about finding that sweet spot that makes sense for their specific situation.
So what are some key questions that companies might ask themselves when they're thinking about expanding?
Well, one of the first questions should be, what are we really good at? What are our core competencies? If a company excels at innovation, they might focus on developing new products or entering new markets. But if their strength is operational efficiency, maybe they'll look for acquisitions that allow them to streamline processes and cut costs.
So play to your strengths, basically.
Exactly. Don't try to be something you're not. Focus on what you do well and leverage that. Another important thing to consider is the competitive landscape.
Oh, right. Knowing your rivals, understanding the market dynamics, that's all crucial, right?
Absolutely. Are there opportunities to acquire competitors or maybe form strategic partnerships? Is the market ripe for disruption? For example, if a market is really fragmented with lots of small players, a company might see an opportunity for horizontal integration, to consolidate and become the dominant force.
So it's like a game of chess, figuring out your next move based on the positions of all the other pieces.
I like that analogy. It's all about strategy and anticipating your opponent's next move. Of course, all the strategizing is meaningless if you don't have the resources to back it up.
Right. Expansion takes money, whether you're going the organic route or the external route.
For sure. Companies need to crunch the numbers. Can they afford to make an acquisition? Do they have the capital to invest in a major marketing push for a new product launch? Financial modeling is a crucial part of this process.
You can't just jump into expansion blindly hoping for the best.
No, definitely not. And I think it's also important for companies to be honest with themselves about their appetite for risk.
That's a good point. Some companies are more comfortable taking big swings, while others are more cautious. A startup with a disruptive technology might be willing to gamble on a bold acquisition, while a well-established company might stick to slower, more predictable organic growth.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right balance between ambition and prudence. No two expansion journeys are the same.
That's for sure. And it's also important to remember that expansion isn't a one-time event, right? It's an ongoing process that requires constant evaluation and adjustment.
Absolutely. The market changes, customer preferences evolve, and companies need to be adaptable, willing to change their strategies to stay ahead of the curve.
So flexibility is key. Always be ready to pivot.
Exactly. Don't get stuck in your ways. Sometimes what worked yesterday won't work tomorrow. You got to be willing to adapt.
I like that. So we've covered a lot of ground today, different types of expansion, the potential benefits and risks involved, and the factors that companies need to consider when they're making these big decisions. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about understanding your core competencies.
Ah, yes, back to the basics.
Why is that so crucial for successful expansion?
It all boils down to focus. If you try to be everything to everyone, you end up spreading yourself too thin. You lose that competitive edge.
So don't try to chase every shiny object that comes along.
Right. Expansion should be about leveraging your existing strengths, not trying to be something you're not. It's about strategic growth, not just growth for growth's sake.
That's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the hype and the excitement of getting bigger, but ultimately, growth is just a means to an end, not an end in itself.
Well said. It all comes down to asking the right questions. What are we good at? What are our goals? And what's the best way to achieve those goals while staying true to our core values?
Those are great questions for any business leader to ponder. And speaking of pondering, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question.
Oh, I love a good cliffhanger.
Think about a company you really admire, one that's seen significant growth over the years. How did they get there? What expansion strategies did they use? And were those strategies ultimately successful? Take some time to analyze their journey, their decisions, their wins, and their losses.
Yeah, I think that's a great exercise. It's like you're getting a behind-the-scenes look at how these companies operate, how they think about growth.
It's like a real-world case study you can learn from.
Yeah, it's like solving a business mystery. What were the key decisions that led to their success? Or, in some cases, their downfall?
Exactly. And, what might look like a brilliant move from the outside could actually be hiding all sorts of problems, like clashes between company cultures or those integration challenges we talked about.
It's a good reminder that there's always more to the story than what we see in the headlines.
Oh, for sure. I mean, business is ultimately about people, and those human dynamics can make or break even the most well-thought-out expansion plan.
That's what I love about this topic. It's not just about spreadsheets and financial models. It's about real people making tough choices and navigating this constantly changing business landscape.
It's definitely not for the faint of heart. You got to be adaptable, willing to adjust your strategies as you go.
It's all about being agile, being able to pivot when you need to. You got it. So I think our listeners are walking away from this deep dive with a much deeper understanding of how businesses actually grow. All those different options, the potential benefits and risks, it's a lot to digest.
Definitely a lot to consider. But hopefully, they now have a framework for thinking about these issues, whether they're running their own business or just trying to understand the business world a little bit better.
Even if you're just investing in the stock market, knowing how companies expand can give you an edge.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Mhm.
Well, I want to thank you again for joining us today and sharing your expertise. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Likewise, I always enjoy our conversations.
And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive. We hope you found this exploration of business expansion informative and, well, maybe even a little bit inspiring.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for more resources and links to some real-world examples of the things we discussed today.
Great reminder. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of business.
And a special thank you to Google Notebook LM for the powerful audio dialogue and AI assistance.
This has been a PLC strategy production.